views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, when discussing medical malpractice, plaintiffs' attorneys, the health industry, and of course patients all have very different views. The topic is one of the more controversial in the legal industry, and that is why we will be sitting down with an expert to discuss recent developments you should know about. Plus, our cameras went back out to the streets to hear your opinions for an all-new edition of Today's Verdict Asks. Then later on in the program, we will get a chance to delve much further into a requested topic, laws that affect our youth, otherwise known as juvenile law. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. Hello and welcome to Today's Verdict, the live and interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet us at Today's Verdict and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. Also, make sure to like us and follow us on Facebook at Today's Verdict and check us out at BronxNet.tv/BronxLegal. And last but certainly not least, don't forget to tweet me at David Lesh. Well, when it comes to ailments that affect our general health, many of our viewers may make a mistake when performing a self-diagnosis, but what happens when your doctor makes the mistake? Well, joining us today to help understand the debate surrounding the area of law known as medical malpractice is attorney Anthony Parati. Anthony, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, David.
You know, when you're seen by a doctor and you think there's something wrong, you become very scared, and I think many of the viewers, and they write in and they say they don't even know if they have a malpractice action. How do you generally end up representing people who have medical malpractice issues?
Most people come to me by word of mouth. They've heard about me, and you have a friend or somebody, you need somebody you trust, and then I'll get a call and they'll just have a conversation with me over the phone, and I'll just ask them to give me a short narrative, and then we'll discuss it from there. And if there is something, you know, we'll
yeah, because they don't know. I mean,
right.
They're not sure. They might think that the doctor did something wrong, but they come to you, and when they come to you, what do you do first? Do they bring the stuff with them? How does it usually work?
A lot of times they don't have access to the medical records. So what happens is they'll come and see me, and then we'll sit down with myself and my associate, and we'll take a narrative from them. Maybe they'll bring a family member, and I always encourage that, because a lot of the times the person who's injured doesn't really recall a lot. The person who is next to them, the wife, the daughter, may be able to be very helpful to fill in the gaps that injured person forgets.
Which is probably a good reason why you should bring somebody with you.
Absolutely. When
you're having a medical procedure, because you're really not in it.
And I think
mentally.
And also, when you're going to interview a doctor, it's great to have like a family member there, because they can listen to it from a different perspective.
Now, client comes to you, and maybe you're still, debating: is there medical malpractice? Is there not? How do you find out? What are you doing as the attorney to figure out whether or not this is actually medical malpractice?
Critical part is to speak to the client and their loved one, and then after that, collect the medical records. I don't have my clients get the medical records, because half the time the doctors or the hospitals don't give them all the records. So I send in a HIPAA-compliant authorization over to the doctor or the hospital. I ask for a certified copy of the record. The records come to me, and I personally review each and every record just to get an analysis of what has happened to this person.
Is there ever an issue where pages may be missing, things should be there that aren't there? You have to kind of go back again?
Unfortunately, David, that happens a lot. A lot of times it'd be something simple. It's a two-sided document, but they only copy the first side. But a lot of times pages are missing, and sometimes it's purposeful.
And certainly a client would know on their own if they were getting it and bringing it to you, because they don't know that it's a double-sided or any other reasons.
Correct, or they wouldn't know what to look for. There's certain clues that you could look for, how it continues on, flow sheets, they're numbered, things like that. There's things to look for in order to ascertain that, and it's happened a lot in my career.
All right, before before we actually get to where you're sending it and how we figure out whether or not there is malpractice now with certain experts, what kind of cases do you see in your office generally?
Well, I mean, for me, the medical malpractice is unfortunately a large part of my caseload. And people come to me because they've been very seriously injured, and then they need help of either through a death of their loved one or to themselves. And that's my job, to try to see if I can ascertain.
Which, by the way, leads me to my next question. We're talking about, you know, and the viewers have to understand this. You have time limits to bring these actions against certain doctors,
correct,
certain hospitals. Tell us a little bit about the time limits.
The time limits, especially if it's a New York City Health and Hospital Corporation, you only have 90 days to bring a notice of claim. So are there exceptions to that rule? Can you file a late notice of claim? Yes, but it makes it much more complicated. So the first thing you want to know is it a city hospital? If it's a private hospital, then you have 2 years for wrongful death and 2.5 years for the statute of limitations from the date of the malpractice. Now, there are certain exceptions. There could be the continuous treatment doctrine.
Give me an example. What would that be?
Continuous treatment would be that you operate on a person. They remain in the hospital. They are treating that person for that condition until they're discharged. You could technically argue that continuing treatment doctrine wouldn't be from the date of the actual malpractice, would be from the date in which they are discharged, because they're treated for the condition which was the subject of the malpractice.
Well, getting back to the city hospitals, what we're talking about, like Harlem Hospital, we're talking about Lincoln Hospital.
Right.
So these hospitals, if you're treated there and you're injured by doctor, nurse, or whomever, well, you really, 90 days, you got to file this notice of claim.
If you want to bring the action against the hospital, and if that person who is that doctor is an employee, then they're covered by the statute. There could be a situation where they're a private attending in which they are not covered by the statute, but don't chance it,
right,
because you should really always bring in that hospital if in fact there is malpractice.
And the sad thing is, Anthony, is many people don't even know within a 90 days that somebody did this to them, or there is an issue.
Right.
Maybe it flares up 95 days later or 100 days later.
Right.
So,
but a lot of times for serious malpractice cases, and remember, all the malpractice cases that us trial attorneys take, they have to have serious injuries. It can't be something trivial, because the time, effort, and expense is all on a contingency basis, and therefore we don't want to invest 500 to 1,000 hours or $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 in expenses if it's unwarranted.
Now, interestingly, we were talking off camera a little bit about dental malpractice cases.
Yes.
And how, you know, there aren't as many dental malpractice cases because the recovery for the plaintiff isn't as much as it would be for a medical malpractice, and you're spending so much money on these cases, it's almost you have to turn away some of these people who are injured in the dental chairs.
Some of these cases may have merit, but if in fact the injury, let's say, is you lost a tooth, what is the value of a lost tooth to most jurors of what they would reasonably award for that injury? And if I have to invest 500, 1,000 hours on a case, and maybe to hire an expert in dental malpractice, if I get someone who's top flight, it's going to cost me 10, 15 grand. How can I justify that to the client if the recovery is not going to equal the time and expense?
Right. And by the way, you pay for these expenses.
Absolutely. We front all expenses for the experts.
Right. And so which leads me to the experts.
Yes.
You're sending out the records. What else? What do you send to the experts so you know? Because listen, you're not a doctor. You may think there's malpractice, but the expert's the one who's going to tell you there's malpractice or there's not. Am I correct?
You are absolutely correct. And every lawyer in the state of New York is bound by the law to have a doctor give an opinion with a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether there was a mistake or a departure from acceptable medical practice. So therefore, however, medical malpractice attorneys, we have to know the medicine just as well as those doctors, as you know.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
and there's a ton of training involved in that, 25 years of just studying and knowing, and you need to know it well. You just can't.
And interestingly, when you give an expert a file to review, sometimes the experts, well, they don't want to testify against another doctor. Do I really have to say that this person did something wrong?
That's a huge issue.
I know his friend who I went to medical school with. I mean, these are tough issues.
To find an expert in today's day and age to testify, like let's say on neurosurgery, is very difficult. A lot of times we have to go out of state because we only want top flight board certified physicians taking a look at these cases. The physician that I hired to review from the beginning is the same person who's going to testify at the time of trial. So I don't want a yes person. I want somebody who can tell me definitively what has happened in her or his opinion, and then that person will flow me through the case when I have questions and at the time of trial to testify.
I want to talk to you a little about this issue regarding the statute of limitations and when it runs, because as you and I know, there are certain types of medical malpractice cases that can't be brought because the statute has run yet the person really didn't find out about the malpractice until after the time has expired. And it's really not fair.
And it is not fair. And right now, the New York State Trial Lawyers has lobbied the Assembly and the New York State Legislature to have the law placed that it shouldn't be from the time of the malpractice. Let me give you a classic example.
Sure.
A woman goes in for a mammogram. They had the mammogram. The radiologist says, everything is clear. Come back to me in 3 years. 3 years later, they come back. They
Stage
take another
5,
one.
stage 5
Stage 4
cancer,
cancer.
stage 4.
And they compare it to the one before and like, oh, we missed it. Well, that's not fair to a woman. A lot of times these issues are targeting, unfortunately, women and or minorities who then will not follow up within the statute of limitations period of time because they're told, come back in 3 years, and that's not fair.
Listen, before you go, because we don't have that much time, but I want to know, where do we get you? Where do we find you? What's contact information? We want to make sure we get it up on the screen, but where do we get you?
My office is at 2 Overhill Road, Scarsdale, New York. My telephone number is 914-723-4333.
Great, and we got it on the screen. Now, let's get back to the discussion. Tips, okay? Somebody's watching right now. They're not sure. They think they have a case. Maybe another lawyer's rejected or so. They don't really know. What advice do you give somebody who's watching right now and they think, you know what, I think my doctor did something that the doctor shouldn't have done, and I think I have a problem here. What do you say to somebody?
But a lot of people may turn to somebody that they trust, such as somebody who has medical knowledge, their physician that they've known for years. This happened, what do you think? And they may tell them something off the record, so to speak. And if they don't get that benefit or that help, then come to a good quality lawyer who does medical malpractice and who can then give them the benefit of their knowledge. And they're not paying for our time. If we don't get them a result, I don't get paid a dime. So if there's something there, we will be able to tell them.
Now, you've been trying cases for a long time.
Yes.
Do you find that that jurors are looking favorably in terms of certain types of medical malpractice cases as opposed to other malpractice cases, or?
But it also depends upon venue. Let's say in Westchester County, very, very conservative. So a Westchester County jury may look at a medical malpractice differently than, let's say, other venues.
How about a Bronx venue? Because we're here filming in the Bronx. What about
I
the
find
Bronx?
a Bronx venue is very fair, reasonable, the way they approach it. They want to hear from the victim. They want to hear from the doctor. And then they're going to make a decision after they hear all of the evidence. They're going to hear from our experts. They're going to hear from the defense experts. They're going to hear summations. And then they're going to make a decision.
Good stuff. And you're going to come back and tell us how your practice is going, right?
Look forward to it.
All right, well, continuing with the topic of medical malpractice, our cameras went out to the streets to hear what the community had to say on this edition of Today's Verdict Asks. Let's take a look.
I don't have a chance to see somebody die.
Okay.
I go to the doctor, he look me, he take care of me very good.
I mean, yeah, that does. You have to kind of get a second opinion, I guess. Google them, see what you can find.
No, it's not surprising to me
Why?
because there's a lot of things out here that people really shouldn't be doing. And some people just don't care.
I'm very careful about doctors anyway, so in a sense, really it doesn't. But it certainly is alarming. I'd also would want to know, is this something people are resorting to because they're angry and they're frustrated that something's happened and they don't understand why the person died? Or is it really a question of incompetence? Because I think those are two different things.
We have to take a quick break, but don't worry, we'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this.
Hey, I'm Darren Jaime. I'm the host of Wednesdays Open right here on BronxNet Television, Channel 67, and also on Verizon Files, Channel 33. Want to invite you every Wednesday. You get an opportunity to see what's going on in the world of news, current events, debates, public information. That's what happens here on Open every Wednesday. So we invite you to join us right here on BronxNet Television.
Wow, these are really good.
You act surprised. Practice makes perfect.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
I love taking care of my mom. It wasn't easy at first. She learned how to better communicate her needs.
And you learned how to not ignore yours.
I discovered how to make healthier meals.
And I discovered how much I enjoyed them.
Becoming a caregiver is a learning experience for everyone. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
Hey, did you know 2.4 million loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home? Let's go to the shelterpetproject.org and meet if you are in a shelter near you. Harlow, oh, she's one great listener who loves to hear all your stories. My kind of cat. Cerulo is a sweet, goofy boy who's eager to please. Sounds just like another dog I know. So go to the shelterpetproject.org, search your local shelters and rescues, and go for a cuddle with your next best friend. Adopt.
All right, welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesh. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet us at Today's Verdict. Well, as more and more adolescents fall into trouble with the law, the family's main focus is to keep them out of the juvenile detention system. But with a new system in place, it becomes a learning process for both the parent and child. Joining us today to share more on this topic and what steps you can take is juvenile law attorney Walter Fields. Walter, I'm a little new to this juvenile law area. It's not something I practice. I don't know it too well. Could you walk us through the juvenile law process? What ages are we talking about here?
Sure, and thank you for having me today.
It's my pleasure.
It's basically from 15 to 17. The family court only has jurisdiction on kids that are 15 and under. The system is basically, it's a criminal system that family court handles. It's supposed to be a system that treats the juveniles better. I don't know if it always does, but that's the goal of the system.
Okay, so you're talking about 15, 16, what age exactly?
It's 15 and under, so it's 15, 14. Most of the kids, the young people you'll see in court, in the family court, in the juvenile delinquency system, are 15, 14, and 13. Generally, they've been arrested. They see a judge almost immediately, most times. And then the judge gets to make a decision whether she thinks they're going to return to court and whether she thinks they're a continuous danger to the community, whether she thinks they're going to commit another crime. In the juvenile system, there is no right to bail, so it all depends on what the judge thinks of you at this initial appearance.
So let's say you get a 14-year-old who is picked up for, I don't know, drugs, selling drugs on the street. Right?
Allegedly, yes.
Allegedly, okay?
Right.
Allegedly, it's very allegedly. It's
always say allegedly.
Always allegedly, okay? Brought into the system. What's the first thing that happens? Do they any fingerprinted? What's happening at this point?
They are fingerprinted. They go through basically the same system as an adult as far as the fingerprints go. The juvenile is generally very scared. He hasn't seen a lawyer right away, and then he's brought to family court where he's in a lockup. He's in a juvenile lockup.
Juvenile lockup.
It's a juvenile lockup.
There's no adults in this lockup.
There's no adult lockups, and even when he's in the police precinct, he's not supposed to be in contact with adult prisoners that's being held. Does it happen sometimes?
Does it happen?
Sure it does. And that's the unfortunate part of our system.
Why would that happen? Why would they put somebody who's 14 in a lockup with a 25-year-old?
Generally, police say they made a mistake or that the juvenile wasn't honest about his age, or sometimes it's just they're crossing. But it adds to this fear for this juvenile, for this alleged offender. It adds to his angst. And you got to understand, juveniles are not just small people. They're different. They have their brains are not functioning the way an adult does. They don't know what's going on. They're generally very confused. Police have tried to talk to them a lot of times. They haven't been able to see their parent, or they've been able to see their parent for a very short period of time. And that's when the lawyer gets a chance to speak to him when he's brought to family court.
And what lawyer are we talking? We're talking about a court-appointed lawyer, am I correct? Or a private lawyer if they can afford it, whoever.
Either or. And you walk in there and you have a juvenile who's very scared. He's very frightened. And generally, you, as an attorney, private or appointed,
have you represented people in this area, or
that's what I primarily represent.
You do.
I'm a criminal attorney, and I primarily represent juveniles at this point.
Okay.
And you're trying to get what happened. What are the police accusing you of? And the juvenile is so scared, he's so frightened, and all he wants to know is, can I go home? And can you explain to me the system? Because they don't know the system. Sometime at 15 and 14 years old, you might have a middle schooler, and he doesn't know the system.
So where do you get a frantic call from the mother, from the father? How does it usually? Where do you come in? How does that happen?
Well, you get either I'm appointed or I have private cases, and you get a call from the mother, and they say they've just arrested my son, and I have a good son, and I don't know why the police have arrested him, and I think he may have been hurt, and he told me to come to family court tomorrow.
What do I do?
What do I do? And what can I do? And that's when you have to try to locate where their child is, because sometimes they don't know. And that's when you have to be waiting in that family court when they bring that juvenile in, so you can talk to him, so you can reassure him, so you can tell him, no matter what else has happened before this, now you have someone that's fighting for.
What do you see when you see that juvenile a lot of times? Do they see scared, crying, deer in the headlights? What do you...
All of that, and then some. And again, they just want to go home. And in a way, you're almost competing against that fear, because you need to find out what's going on. Because you're going to go into court and you're going to be arguing against a member of corporate counsel who prosecutes juvenile offenders in the city of New York. And you have to be able to say, no, this search wasn't appropriate, this wasn't right, and look at my client's face. Someone beat him up. Who was that? He was in the custody of the police the last 10 hours. So it's reasonable to assume that. But you can't make that argument to a judge. You can't make the argument to the judge that this young man has never committed a crime before or been alleged to commit a crime before, unless you're able to talk to this young man. And that's what you have to do.
And the interesting thing is there's no juries here, right? We're talking about just a judge, am I correct?
Now you're talking about further along, we actually get to trial.
Right, but just the whole, is there ever a jury at all?
Never.
No.
So there's this push in the state legislature to raise the age to 18. And most states do have it at 18. You can be charged as a juvenile offender up until the age of 18.
So that if you're 17 and you allegedly did something, right, you would still be under the juvenile legal system.
Right.
But that's not what's going on in New York.
No, here it's 15. But just remember, when you have that debate, that no matter what you're charged with as a juvenile delinquent, you're never entitled to a jury. Your fate lies with the judge, just the judge.
Now, you're one of the few people that I've spoken to who does not advocate changing the system so that somebody who commits a crime at 17 is still treated as a juvenile.
At heart, I'm a Bronx kid.
Okay.
And I believe in my community. I don't live in the Bronx now, unfortunately, but I'm a Bronx person. And I believe in the community, and I believe in the jury. I believe that a trial is people meeting in the community square. And that's the time when people have a right to speak and be heard.
So you'd rather have the jury decide a 17-year-old's fate than, let's say,
100% of the time.
Okay. Well, that's your opinion. I'm not necessarily to say it's wrong, but that's an interesting, because there's been such a push from the chief judge to the legislature to try and change it, but New York is one of the few states that still treats.
And if you asked 100 lawyers to do exactly what I do, you'd get 99, maybe 98, because I have a friend who thinks like me. But I believe in juries, and I do. We have a special type of crime that's also prosecuted in family court too. They're called designated felonies, and they're really serious felonies. I don't want to get into the minutiae of what the charges are, but it's a real serious felony. And on these really serious type of allegations, a judge does have a right to sentence a young man or a young girl up to 3 years in a juvenile lockup. And that's without the benefit of a jury, by the way.
I asked you off camera whether you think maybe there's a racial component sometimes, when it comes to some of the judges and who they're putting away or not putting away. And it's a controversial thing to discuss. But does that also help you in terms of deciding whether or not you don't like juries as opposed to you rather juries as opposed to judges, or not really?
Well, I think it does play a part in it. It has to. But is there a racial component? I don't know. Okay. But what I can tell you is, from my experience, and I've appeared in every court in the city of New York and in the county of Westchester and beyond, and the overwhelming majority of people I see in the juvenile system, as in the criminal system, are African American or Latinos. Yes. And so,
well, that speaks for itself in some respects, doesn't it?
And as it does.
Okay. Recommendations. What do you think should be done or shouldn't be done to the system right now? How would you fix it in any respects?
Big question, small answer. So I think still in our city, I think kids have way too much time on their hands. I think prevention for these juveniles is a really big thing. I think for every dime you spend on after-school programs and for weekend programs and for basketball camps, I think you save tens of dollars on prosecuting and locking up young people. And at some point, we do have to, once a kid is involved with the system, we have to remember that we're not throwing these people away. This is not a meat grinder. We're not just grinding people up.
By the way, where do we find you?
I'm located in the Bronx.
All right.
I'm at 840 Grand Concourse, Suite 1A. I have an office number, 347-292-1842. And I'm always available to answer calls.
And it's important to have somebody to call when your child is all of a sudden behind bars and you're scared and you're afraid and they can't call you, obviously. So you're an important person to know.
The thing that you got to remember, this is the most important thing, is juveniles from 15 and under in the state of New York, they can't be questioned unless a parent signs and is there with their youth. It's important that the minute you find out that your child has been arrested, that you contact the lawyer immediately.
Immediately.
There's a lot of times, because kids want to please adults, and they'll say whatever an adult wants them to say.
They're scared.
To try to go home.
Just to go home.
So you need to call a lawyer right away.
Good stuff.
Thank you.
Really important stuff. All right, now that we've heard from a professional, it's time to hear your thoughts and opinions on juvenile law for today's second edition of Today's Verdict Asks. Let's take a look.
If they kill somebody, I think they should, because they're thinking like adults. Okay. So they should be treated like them.
I think they should be tried as a 13-year-old because, you know, kids get their stuff from their parents, so obviously they don't know any better.
This goes against everything our justice system is supposed to do, which is to guarantee your rights. 13 is a minor. I don't know where that applies, but that's really shocking to hear.
Depending, like, if they murder, they sometimes deserve taking the blame of, like, an adult person. After all, they did follow the example.
There's some crimes, sometimes they do commit certain crimes, and maybe they should be tried, but I really don't think they should be tried as adults.
I think there should be, if a young person commits murder, I don't think it should be treated the same as if they shoplift. But that still doesn't mean I believe they should be treated as an adult, because they're not an adult.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at www.bronxnet.tv. Also remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesh@bronxnet.org or tweet us at Today's Verdict, and make sure to hashtag #AskToday'sVerdict. From myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. I'm David Lesh, and we will see you again in 2 weeks with an all-new episode of Today's Verdict. See you next time.
I rescued Toast from a shelter in 2011. I love Toast because she's a lazy diva. Toast makes me laugh. When I walked into the shelter, I knew she was special.